Utah's 2024 Big 12 schedule has officially been released, and it's interesting. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you on YouTube as well as on social media, where you can follow our show at Locked On Utes on X. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by FanDuel. You can make every moment more. New customers can join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined on today's show by Kevin Borba of FanNation All Utes. And Kevin, when reacting to the Big 12 schedule, it's a mixed bag in a lot of ways for me. Am I excited about some of the big games and the positives, like excited about the big games? And I think the second half of the season in particular really sets up Utah for success. But we'll talk about this more in the second segment. I don't love that BYU versus Utah isn't on the rivalry weekend. The UCF game, just as someone who gets excited for rivalry weekend, and for so long that game hadn't mattered when Utah played Colorado. This year it was going to matter more than likely even more, and it's not on that weekend again. You get a kind of a little bit of a meaningless game to me against UCF, and I just think it's really interesting to me that Utah's two toughest games of their season, in my opinion, are their first two to open Big 12 play. So in terms of just a fan of just call it like Utah and college football, like I didn't love the schedule, the way it was all scheduled out. And then also, as I mentioned, I just think it's really interesting that you have these massive games against Oklahoma State and Arizona State, which both those matchups, Utah against them, everyone should be ranked. But like, why aren't those in October and November or later in October and November? Like, why are they so early? I just think it's really interesting how everything kind of worked out, Kevin.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like you got to question the thought process, and maybe it's like they don't want to go up against I don't know what week it is. I was trying to look this up while you were talking. The Texas versus Oklahoma game is October 12th. Like maybe the Big 12 is trying to figure out a way to not kind of coincide with the first rivalry week or first big game week of all the other conferences. So they kind of sprinkled in their biggest games of all the contenders early on in the season, so that way everyone's like, oh, the Big 12 is playing, and right now the SEC is still playing the Citadel or whoever it may be or something like that. So I thought that was interesting, like you said. We joked about it before the show. I think we'll know because they play Arizona on the 28th. We'll know by the 28th that evening if Utah is basically controlling the Big 12 and has a path to the playoff, or if they're kind of going to be in a situation where they were, I think it was 2 years ago, when they needed a couple things to go here and there to make the Pac-12 title game. So we'll know by the 28th what their future kind of holds, unless they collapse, obviously.
It is crazy that is how early it feels like. And it's also kind of nice where Utah's, they do have a cupcake, not complete cupcake, because it's I mean, they're at least playing Baylor when a lot of teams wouldn't even play another Power 5 team. Baylor's just down with the way Utah looks right now. I expect Utah to take care of business in that game at Rice-Eccles. It'd be different if it was on the road to me, but Utah should make it out of their first few games fine. I mean, even against Southern Utah and Utah State, I don't expect the Utah starters to be in come the fourth quarter time, but Utah State, you never know. Literally have Bryson Barnes on their team, so we'll see the plays he can make against his former team. But as it relates to the Big 12 schedule, just again, I just think it's crazy that I understand why one of these games is early. It's a marquee game. It matters. But Oklahoma State and then Arizona, I just think it's interesting. It's very much so a welcome to the Big 12 Utah as well, because you do suffer those two losses. Like you said, like your season can kind of fall apart from there. So it is just really strange to me that on paper, and I'm Brett Yormark, all the Big 12, they knew this as well. Like the toughest teams on Utah's schedule are, I just don't know how you don't think it's Oklahoma and Arizona. You cannot look in a way too early top 25 list and not find some combination of Utah, Oklahoma State, and Arizona as the top three teams in the Big 12 currently. And they decided they wanted all of them to play each other in September and not in October or even November a little bit. That's the part that, once again, I just think it's so strange.
Yeah, I think it's really weird. But again, I honestly think it's the Big 12 maybe looking around, because obviously the Big 12 was the final conference. I don't know if the Big 10's released their schedule,
Yeah,
but the
like you
SEC
said.
and the ACC both released their schedules. And so maybe they like looked around and were like, okay, do we want to go up against insert like Oklahoma versus Texas? I'm gonna go back to that one just because I looked that up.
Yeah.
Do we want to try to get ratings against them? Because I promise you, Utah, Oklahoma State's not gonna outdo those that game. Like
No, it is not.
it's just the truth. Like unfortunately,
Facts are facts.
these programs in the Big 12 are still developing rivalries. I also hopefully everyone's healthy by this time of the year. Unlike at the end of last season, that Colorado Utah game, Shador didn't play. Obviously, Cam Rising didn't play. Luke Batari was playing. We didn't even get Bryson Barnes to play.
Or Nate Johnson.
Right. So it was just one of those things where like maybe there was just some motivation to kind of hopefully have everyone healthy. And I also think it is interesting. One, Utah doesn't have a single conference game that's like consecutively on the road, so they don't have to go at Oklahoma State, at Arizona. But the game that also stands out to me, I know we're not talking about just random games, but that late November game against Iowa State is kind of tricky, just because Iowa State's always a tricky team late in the year. And so I really think Utah, I won't say they kind of won their scheduling like reveal, but like I definitely feel like it could have gone worse. Like they could have had Iowa State paired with Oklahoma State and Arizona. But I think they made out all right. So it's not too bad. It's just kind of weird, I guess you could call it.
I totally agree with that. I've referenced this stretch for Utah numerous times on my show. Last year, I felt like the stretch of games that included USC, Oregon, Arizona State, and then going against Washington would decide Utah's season. They went 2-2 in those games, hence why they were not involved in the Pac-12 championship. That's even before they would go on to, of course, lose to Arizona in addition to those as well, too. So I think you're absolutely right there. Some other interesting things just to note with the schedule. And you did, like you said, you did make a great note, too, that it's like Utah's no in-conference game, back-to-back road games. It is funny that like their only back-to-back road game consists of a bus ride to Utah State because then they go to Oklahoma State the week after. So very lucky for Utah there. I think the other notable thing we got to talk about is the buys. I really like the buy game placement. Can I nitpick and say, hey, can we have it between Oklahoma State and Arizona? Sure. Would that have been nice? Yeah. But you'll play 5 games. You get a bye. You get 3 more games in, then a bye. And then you get what Utah hopes to be 5 more games if you make the Big 12 championship and get a bye there. So I really like the placement of the bye games too. And Kevin, you can expand on the bye games too and the importance of those. But is there any other things, just big takeaways you had from looking at this schedule too?
Yeah, the bye thing is huge because honestly, the worst place to have a bye is like really early in the year. My first year covering Stanford, they had a week 2 bye week. So it was like they played Colgate and then it was like bye week. And then they took on Caleb Williams and Jordan Addison. And it was like, okay, well, cool. Everyone's rested for a week 2 game. So I think Utah kind of, there's only so much you can complain about with bye weeks, but I think they made out all right. I do think everything for the most part is pretty good. I think that late November game against UCF may work out in Utah's favor. It's one less game they have to play in the cold. Like obviously it's not BYU, but if they're on the road, like would you rather be on the road in the snow or like would you rather be on the road in Florida when it's like probably a little windy? So I would say that's my other observation because I know we're going to talk about BYU not being that final week, but it's cold in November in Utah. This could be like the prime opportunity for Utah to like get up for a game because it's not freezing. And I also feel like cold weather games, there's always that added element of like what's going to happen because of the weather.
And do in some ways cold weather games benefit Utah because they like to run the ball and play defense? Sure, but there's going to be very few games this year that I don't feel like Utah has the quarterback advantage with Cam Rising. So I don't want that neutralized. I'm not making calling Cam Rising Josh Allen, but when the Bills have hosted numerous playoff games, Josh Allen has been neutralized in some ways because they just can't throw the ball in that weather, and that's where their offensive line play has hindered them a little bit. Offensive line for Utah still a big question mark coming into this season. I like the pieces they have there, but I'm not ready to say this is going to be one of the best offensive lines in college football, which 2 years ago, I was definitely feeling that with Braden Daniels, Satao Laumea, Keaton Bills, all coming back to the unit versus a lot more up in the air, like I said. So it is interesting. And Utah is going to be excited to go out to Florida in December rather than when they were out there in August a couple of years ago. The cold, that is the time you definitely want to be in Florida when the weather is like that. And you mentioned they're going out to Florida. They're not going to Provo, or Provo's not coming. BYU's not coming to Utah. That's one of the interesting things about this schedule. We long thought that the rivalry game would be played with Utah versus BYU the last game of the regular season. That's not the case. And to me, that is significant. I want to talk a little bit more about that in one moment. But first, I want to talk to all of you about our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. I love getting together with friends and family, watching the commercials, and just enjoying the final NFL game until September. And FanDuel has so many ways you can end the season with a dub, two, or even three. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which player will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers can join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. You can make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And don't forget the NBA also rolling on as well. Lots of big names and headlines, whether it's Joel Embiid, who hopefully is playing the night that this comes out. That night, we'll see Nikola Jokic, what he continues to do. Giannis and the Bucks trying to figure things out with Doc Rivers. Lots going on in the NBA. So make sure you head over to FanDuel and get in on all of that action today. Also, want to talk to all of you about our friends at UCCU. Learn and earn, the UCCU mobile banking app that pays your entire family to learn about money. Kids look to parents to become more financially literate, but parents, they don't always know the answers. Learn and Earn breaks down financial topics into fun, bite-sized educational games like quizzes and trivia. Every time a family member completes a topic, they earn points that can occur and can be redeemed for gift cards to stores like Amazon, Apple, Sephora, Walmart, Nike, and more. There is age-appropriate content for every member of the family. You can compete against each other and track their progress on leaderboards. Learn and Earn is inside the UCCU mobile banking app, so play it anytime, anywhere. The more you play, the more you learn. And the more you learn, the more you earn. Learn and Earn, part of UCCU's award-winning B-Money Smart Youth Banking Program, helping kids, teens, and parents have fun while becoming more financially literate together. UCCU, love where you bank. Kevin, a lot of Utah fans, and if any BYU fans have stuck around from yesterday's crossover show I did with Locked On Cougars host Jake Hatch, were excited to see when the rivalry between Utah and BYU, on what date would it be renewed. We all started to kind of lean towards, you know what, this is a priority. It feels like it's the biggest rivalry in the Big 12 right now. Sure, there's some other ones in there, but I don't know. I feel like it might be Utah BYU. So I thought that they would want to stick that on rivalry weekend when all the major rivalries are played in college football. And no, I'm not calling it as big as the Iron Bowl, the game, all of that, but still a rivalry game that I think people would watch, especially when the playing date is on the Friday night and you're avoiding the Saturday in which all the eyes will be on those other big games. I just thought that made a lot of sense to put it there. Big 12 felt otherwise. And not only is it not like just a week before, it's on November 9th. So Utah will have 3 more games to play. And after they've played BYU, I thought there was a real opportunity here. Like I talked before about maybe there's some value of giving it a spotlight in another week. And that's maybe what they want to do. But if you were going to do that, I'd almost still play the game in like October, maybe even late September. Like it's just weird to me to have it in November, but not on rivalry weekend to me, or maybe even a week before something. I just think it's really strange and I don't love it.
Yeah, it's definitely, I like the thought process of like, maybe it's to get the intriguing matchup, but like if that was their goal, I'm just going to go off on some of the other games this weekend I haven't pulled up. We have Florida State at Notre Dame the same week. You have, let's see, Alabama at LSU, Washington at Penn State, Georgia at Ole Miss, Florida at Texas, and then Oklahoma at Missouri. So that right there is like 6, or I don't know how many games I read off, but 5 or 6 ranked games. And it's like,
that's big games.
Yeah, they're huge games. And it's like, is Utah BYU in that caliber? Probably not. I think it doesn't help. And this could be a total reach. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Utah has downplayed this game a lot. Like they're like, especially Kyle Whittingham. He says it's just another game. I think he knows it's a rivalry, but I don't think he gives it like that attention or that like spotlight, if you will. And maybe the Big 12 is just trying to find another rival, or maybe, I don't know. It's one of those weird things. It's like, is there a way to bring eyes to the Big 12 that weekend? Maybe that is the right way, because obviously there's so many other great matchups in the SEC. Maybe if college football knows that they have a huge in-state rivalry going on, maybe people will be dialed in. It's just one of those things where people get worked up about the smallest things. And I think it would have been cool to play at the end of the year, but I think the Big 12 is doing things differently. I think that's kind of their MO. I think that's how they're going to stay afloat as a conference, and maybe not having this as a rivalry game per se, like according to our standards, is the way to do it.
I think you're absolutely right. I think Kyle Whittingham has a little bit. I think most people know like how much it still means to the fans and everything. And I feel like nationally, hopefully people still recognize Utah versus BYU is an exciting kind of matchup because of that connection that's existed there. But you're not wrong. And obviously Kyle Whittingham, like they're nowhere, and it's not going to change this. Like Utah doesn't have a, like, we got, like, this is like, they don't value it the way Michigan and Ohio State value the game. I'm not saying you have to, but it's just, like you said, it's not there the same intensity. It doesn't feel like Utah goes, hey, we're working every day to do two things this year: win the Big 12 and beat BYU. I don't get that's the sense, the mindset. I feel like it is like, hey, when it comes up, it'll be a rivalry. It's important, but it's definitely not something that's on their mind like some of the other biggest rivalries are. And yes, Utah versus BYU, I do think it's a good rivalry, but I think the reason that I don't love that it's on that weekend with all those major games you just said is BYU, please shock me. Please be in contention for a top 15 spot in college football. By the time that game rolls around, I don't expect BYU to be ranked. I expect Utah to be ranked, and Utah's good at home. I expect them to take care of business. There are a lot more intriguing matchups to offer a college football fan that weekend that have those playoff implications over Utah BYU. While because it's Utah BYU, I think people will care. There'll be some fun to it as well. But these are the kind of things now that Utah and BYU will play again year after year, can go back into building the rivalry. Hopefully it is a fun game. It's competitive, so it makes people excited for the next one too. I think that's something that that definitely matters as well. But it'll be interesting to see. And once again, just weird that this game is late in the year, but I'm glad they're playing it. I know there's always a lot of vitriol between the fan bases, but I think it's going to be fun to have it back once again. Final big takeaways on the schedule just for me is I do overall, when it just is like, hey, Utah making the college football playoff, that's where I think the schedule works out well for them. I expect them to be undefeated, of course, in the non-conference play. I think they got a really good chance to come out and make an early statement in the season against Oklahoma State. Once again, I like one of these games being early. I don't love both of them being early. But what's nice is they're not both on the road. So you get Arizona coming to you, and they have lost some players because of Jedd Fisch's departure. So that's another one where I like Utah's early chances. And I think if you get those two big wins early, just sets you up for success. I mean, even the next stretch after the bye, Arizona State, TCU, Houston, Utah, all clearly better than those teams. And even to close the season, yes, the one against Iowa State's a little interesting, but even that's at home. It takes only Bo Nix is the only guy to come into Rice-Eccles Stadium and beat Kyle Whittingham's Utah team at home the last couple seasons. Brock Purdy ain't walking through that door for Iowa State. I know they got some good players, but that one's just hard for me to see. So yeah, there's still opportunities. I still give Colorado a chance to beat Utah just because I'm that high on Shedeur Sanders. I think there's a way they can turn around. So, and BYU's a rivalry game. UCF late in the season, if they overlook them, like there are still opportunities for Utah to stumble throughout this schedule. But, and yes, a while ago, there was an article released like calling Utah's schedule one of the easiest in college football. And I think that's where you can kind of see it in like that. But just seeing the dates on paper, I do think as it relates to Utah wanting to make a run at a Big 12 title and a playoff berth for the first time in their program history, that's where the schedule works out well.
Yeah, and I think it is worth noting both Oklahoma State and Arizona got out to slow starts this past year. And so it could also work out in Utah's favor in the sense that Utah's a veteran team. We typically know what to expect from them. Maybe Arizona State, or not Arizona State, Arizona and Oklahoma State, maybe they take a little bit to get cooking. Obviously, like you mentioned, Arizona has the changes with the coach. They lost some key players. And Oklahoma State, they have a good running game, but their quarterback situation with Alan Bowman, I'm like, is that really convincing enough? I don't know. So I think it's weird that, and kind of, I guess that could be a little scary that they play them back to back and early in the season, but that could also be an advantage for Utah. I also don't feel like they really got a tough, like a road schedule. Like I could be wrong, but Oklahoma State is by far the toughest game.
Easily.
They go, it's a crazy crowd out there. They go crazy for their Cowboys. And then I look at everyone. Yeah. And I look at everyone else, and I think outside of Oklahoma State, the toughest road game is probably going to be at Colorado, and that's not until November. So I think Utah made out pretty well.
1000% agree. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, and we're going to continue to talk about this schedule for Utah football the rest of the week on Locked On Utes. But for the rest of today's show, I want to talk about the Utah women's basketball team that is still in the midst of a strong season, albeit a little bit of a stumble. First, the Utah women's basketball team took care of business last Friday against Oregon, defeating them 58-48. This is another one. Alyssa Peely doing her thing, leading the team in scoring, having 16 points, 8 rebounds also. How about Jenna Johnson with the double-double, 10 points, 10 rebounds for her as well. Also, Deja Young, and since being inserted in the starting lineup, she brought the energy off the bench, now does that in the starting lineup, had 3 steals, scored a couple buckets as well for this Utah women's team, and always good to get a road win in college basketball, and that is what Utah was able to do when they went on the road and defeated Oregon. But unfortunately, they were not able to earn a road win against Oregon State, and the Utah offense had a tough performance in this one. They scored only 66 points, which I believe is their season low. And give the Bees credit. The Pac-12 is always tough when it comes to women's college basketball, and this game against Oregon State, no exception. They're ranked 25, and it's hard to win on the road. Oregon State's 17-3 right now. Utah's 15-6. They're 5-4 in conference play, which is crazy because they have also have just last week they had wins against 2 top 7 teams. That's just how crazy good the conference is overall. But this is one where Alyssa Peely showed up. I mean, she had 28 on, albeit on 28 shots, but still getting the 28 points like that. But Utah just not able to find a rhythm offensively. They only score 13 points in the fourth quarter, while Oregon State would go on to score 24 to put this game really out of Oregon State actually, where Utah struggles in the second and third, where they only scored 13 and 10 points, and then Oregon State would go on to, in those quarters, really outscore Utah. They outscored them by 19 points in the third, and this is where you really feel the absence of no Gianna Neepkins, who was out for the season with an injury, Utah's second best player coming into the year, in my opinion. So these kind of weekends are tough. And you get one, you split the weekend. But like if you want to be a team that goes to the Final Four, that's where these kind of weekends are like, we'll see what the ceiling is. But I'm still really high on this Utah women's team. I just don't think even though it's not a great loss when you lose that badly, you still only lost to a top 25 team. So that's where I'm still optimistic about this Utah women's basketball team.
Yeah, and I think the hard part is you look at like how well they shot. Not often are you going to be able to shoot 39% as a team and win a game, and not often are you going to allow your opponents to shoot. Because I'm not joking, Oregon State shot 69% from the field and then 65% from 3 with 13 threes. So it's not often a team's going to get that hot. Also, if you watch a lot of Utah women's basketball, like we all know, everyone does. The Utah Utes are a very entertaining team. We love Alyssa Peely. She's really good. But you look at Kenny McQueen, 0 points in 30 minutes is not the norm for her. Even if you go through like her last few games, she had scored 7, 21, 8, 14, 3 against Stanford, 16, 12. So it's just not common for someone to get like her to get shut out. So it's just one of those things where I think everyone in college basketball is susceptible to those games where someone's going to get really hot, and the best you could do is try to be hot. And unfortunately for them, Oregon State probably came close to a record in terms of threes, and I think shooting however poorly Utah shot is not the recipe for success. But I would look more at that USC and UCLA games as more of their ceiling, because both those teams were playing quite well prior to that game. And I just think Oregon State's kind of an anomaly, even though Oregon State's good, not to take away from them, but shooting 70% from the field is not a normal thing.
Yeah, and I think the nice thing too for the Utah women's basketball team is this is just what's nice about college basketball. Like, yes, the first few rounds of the women's tournament are played at host sites, so that's where they need to improve their stock if they want to get and host games like they did last year. But the Pac-12 tournament, neutral site. The biggest games after that, neutral site as well. And I still think this Utah women's basketball team will put themselves in a position to host games. I know they still have some work to do to climb the standing, but this is a good get-right trip for them. They're on the road again, going to Washington State. Neither of those teams ranked. Then you get your revenge game against Oregon State, who's at home. Oregon comes to town too. I expect Utah to win the next 4. Then you get a huge one. You get a stretch of Colorado, UCLA, and USC. All 3 of those teams ranked inside the top 15 currently. I think Utah has a chance to go on a run to start the second half of their season, because as good as those teams I just mentioned were, at least they don't have any more top 5 opponents coming up their way, because they don't play Stanford again and some of these other ones. And they already played the number 1 team in South Carolina and gave them a game too. So I'm still high on the Utah women's basketball team. It'll be interesting to see how the rest of the season unfolds for them. But Kevin, there's a lot going on at the University of Utah right now. Football schedule coming out. Utah men's and women's basketball in action. Gymnastics team doing their thing too. If people want information on all things Utah athletics, where should they head over to?
Yeah, go over to FN All Utes on Twitter, FanNation All Utes. We are covering, me and my couple guys, we're out here covering everything from football schedule breakdowns to transfer portal stuff. Utah is making some big moves. The Senior Bowl is this week, so you guys won't want to miss our Senior Bowl coverage about Cole Bishop and Sione Vaki and the other guys that are there as well. So, yeah, just make sure to tune in, follow us. We got you covered.
Awesome. Kevin, thank you so much. Appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. We'll be talking some Senior Bowl and more Big 12 schedule stuff, as well as all things relating to the University of Utah on the rest of this week's Locked On Utes. We look forward to seeing you then.